My name is Dale Hartz, and I'm the current president of OD Connection, and we're co-sponsoring tonight's event with CASE. And the first thing that I wanted to say is that it's such a pleasure to be with all of you. How often can we gather in a room with a large group of people that are interested in helping people become better, people that are interested in helping organizations become better, and a group of people that are interested in helping communities become better. So for you, for our guests, speaker, I think you all deserve an applause. Next, I wanted to thank, where's Pat? I wanted to thank Pat. I think most, if not all of us, know Pat. Perfect Pat. Pat, thank you for bringing us together and coordinating, as you always do, wonderful events, and I thank you for that. The third thing I wanted to do is take about 20 minutes of your time. I wanted to see reactions of that. Pat said that we could promote OD Connection, and no, we will not take 20 minutes of your time to explain the wonderful benefits of being a member of that organization. But if you see people with name tags, and some of our board members and active friends, if you just raise your hand, if you reach out to them at the end, they'll certainly share the experiences of being involved in OD Connection, a group of, fine group of consultants working in the internal and external, and we'd love to have you join us and become involved in that group. Without further ado, I'd like Ed to introduce our wonderful guest.
Thanks, Dale. I am Ed Malinowski. I'm the VP of Membership for the OD Connection of Northeast Ohio, and it is my great pleasure to introduce our esteemed guest. And we had a little chat where I was getting to know Anastasia, and this is a trial run for when I'll be introducing her at the OD Network in Portland in a couple weeks. So just give me any tips, any kind of pointers. We both established that we're nervous, and we did establish that you look like normal people, and that, you know, she's been all over the world, and you guys, you're not going to eat us or anything, so that's okay. And we really established that what drew her here was the sense of community. So I think we all have some affiliation to CASE and the MPOD or the MOD program, and really that's what kind of draws us all together, and just OD in general. So Anastasia Bukashe.
Thank you. Yes, it's fine. I'll do it with everybody. Good evening, everybody. As you hopefully know by now, my name is Anastasia Bukashe, and I'm an alumni of CASE. I was here, I was very young when I was here. I was about 6 years old. I started my coursework in 1998, and I finally graduated. I defended my dissertation in 2004. So I took all my coursework at the old building, and all of this stuff is new. But none of it is as beautiful as the people in this room. So I want you to turn to the person nearest you and say, "You truly are beautiful." It is, and as we go on and the drinks keep flowing, you're going to say that more meaningfully. Am I right? Yes. So it truly is my privilege and my joy to be here. It's a privilege because of the reason that Dale spoke about and Ed continued with. It's a privilege to be part of a community of people who care so much about the world that we live in, who are committed to being the best that they can be, who want to bring out the best in others, and who have a passion like I do to wanting to be sure that the world, when we leave it, is a little bit of a better place for us having been here. And it's my joy because as an alumni of CASE living all the way in South Africa, I hardly ever get to be part of the community. So lots of stuff happens and I'm not there. And this is one of those opportunities where I can be physically present with you, I can make connections, and I'm hoping that we'll continue our relationship. In typical Anastasia style, I was very disorganized when I packed. I managed to get my clothes in, so that's why I'm dressed as I'm standing here. But I forgot all my business cards. So I've just put on the board there my email address. Please try very hard not to give me a business card because I have a tendency to lose them as soon as I have them. And then you'll think that I didn't really care and don't want to connect with you. So that'll all end badly. So my suggestion is, so that we can continue our relationship and getting to know each other better as we go forward, take down the email address. If you want to connect, we can connect that way. Yes? Okay, wonderful. As I confessed to Ed and a couple of other people, I'm very nervous. And the reason why I'm feeling this nervous is because I'm in a room filled with people who I know have absolutely amazing stories. Each and every one of us has come to this point of where we are in our lives because we've walked a journey. And this journey has formed who we are, and it has formed the passions that we have. And all of us have experiences, and all of those stories are important and wonderful stories. So I want you again just to turn to the person nearest you and say, I love your story. Which of course begs the next question, which is, what is your story? But we start with that attitude that I know I'm going to love your story. And I'm hoping that as we continue this evening, it'll encourage each one of us to get to know each other's stories a little better. And I'll open that space by telling a little bit of my story. I have no PowerPoint for you today. I always joke that I'm BBT. I was born before technology. But I find that PowerPoint kind of constrains me. Other people are really good with it, and it doesn't constrain them, but it constrains me. So there's no PowerPoint. I might scribble a couple of things on the board. But yeah, I'm really hoping this will be an interactive session and that we'll have time to chat together. What wasn't in my bio, and that's the place I want to start, is that I recently had the privilege of being the chairperson for the World Appreciative Inquiry Conference that was held in Johannesburg, South Africa in July this year. And it was a gathering of our world AI community. Those who could make it climbed on a plane and came. Those who couldn't make it were with us in spirit. And the reason I want to start there is because the conference theme that we chose, I think, is appropriate to the diversity of stories and experiences and expertise that live in this room tonight. We chose the 3 circles of the change revolution that David Cooper-Ryder has just published an article, I think with Lindsay, am I right, Pat? With Lindsay Godwin, talking about the strengths revolution has 3 circles or 3 arenas of activity. And the first arena is those of us in this work, in the work of OD, who are working at the level of elevating individual strengths. So this is at the level of the individual, where we work with others to lift up and elevate their strengths. So that's the first circle. The second circle of the strengths revolution is aligning and magnifying those strengths within a system. So some of us are also involved in this work. It's when we work in a single organization, we lift up the individual strengths, then we align them and magnify them for the best of the organization or the human system. And then there's a third circle of the strengths revolution, and that is, David calls it refracting our strengths out into the world. We have 11 official languages in South Africa, and we all decided refracting was just too hectic a word, so we called it reflecting. And that's where we begin to build positive institutions. So we're working across sectors, across human systems, across organizations, in order to reflect out into the world the very best of the strengths that each one of us have. And the portion that's interesting for me is the portion in the middle here. That as practitioners, whether we're working at the level of the individual, through coaching, through mentoring, through those kinds of interventions that are around an individual person connecting to and living into their strengths and their best possibilities, playing to their strengths, or whether we're working in a system, one human system, where we're working to identify what is the greatest articulation of the very best of where that system is trying to reach to and what they could do together. Or whether we're working at the level of whole communities, whole sectors. What we have in common here in the middle is that at this conference we are bound by the spirit of appreciative inquiry. Ask the person nearest you, do you know what that means? Ask the person nearest you, do you know what that means? The spirit of appreciative inquiry. So what did your partner say? Do they know what it means? What did your partner say? Do they know what it means? The spirit of AI? You didn't follow instructions very well, did you? The spirit of appreciative inquiry in this case talks about that in this global gathering of practitioners, people are working at all kinds of levels, in all kinds of cultures, with lots of different systems. But what holds them together is that they're all working with the appreciative approach. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means specifically later on this evening. But what we've started to focus on and what we were curious about as a community of practice is that as we share the practices of the work that allows us to do this, what we came to understand is that we are human beings. What that means is we're not human doings. So it doesn't matter how good our technical skill is. It doesn't matter how many tools we have. It doesn't matter how knowledgeable or educated we are. In the end, what makes a difference to our clients is who we are being with them, who we are being in that space, because we are human beings, not human doings. And so a lot of what the conference was focusing on is us as practitioners, our journey as practitioners. that we can talk about what we do with our clients or we do in human systems, but our real impact is measured by who we are being and who we are growing into, and that this is a journey. Are you with me? Does that resonate for you? It's part of what distinguishes us in our work. It's the difference between me doing something and somebody else doing something. Each one of us brings our own way of being into that system, and we learn to be in relationship to that system in a particular way. And what I've learned over time, and I'll share a little bit of that story, is that this journey is a lifelong journey. And it's a journey into which I'm continuing to grow more and more fully into who I can be in relationship to others. So when we start off, we may have quite limited views on who others are. We might make a lot of presumptions about them. We might use a lot of the theories that we've learned, which are very helpful guidelines, but we may begin to use them a little bluntly, like a blunt instrument, and end up boxing people in circumstances and situations that really our work is about liberating systems from and people from. And so a lot of being an OD practitioner is about who I am being in that process, what I am learning in that process, how I am expanding my capacities for being in relationship to something that is outside of me, and how that comes to live inside of me. So what I want to share is my journey with Appreciative Inquiry. You all saw Julie arrive and give me a big hug. Julie, I'm so glad you're here. Julie met me when I was 16 years old, which was just a few years ago. As I said, I started when I was 6, so now I'm 24, and you're all looking great. And so Julie's really been a part of a lot of this journey for me. So it's lovely to have you here tonight. Thank you. I first came to know of Appreciative Inquiry back in South Africa because the organization that my parents ran, called Weatherhead Fellowship Center, had a partnership with NTL, the National Training Laboratories. And in the early 80s, early 70s, they started bringing the original T group methodology to South Africa. And this began as a process to train South Africans to become T group leaders. And it was run as a way to bring together across the political spectrum people to begin to find a way to live together. And Julie was one of the NTL trainers that came, and so was David Cooperrider. So David Cooperrider came to South Africa, I think in 1986. Again, I was very young at the time. And he started to explore these ideas of appreciative inquiry. And I want to tell you a little bit about my own background so that you understand how AI really shaped and changed my trajectory and how I got involved in OD. I was born at a time in South Africa, into apartheid South Africa, a time when apartheid was still very strong. And the year that I was born, many of the liberation movements had been banned. People like Nelson Mandela had been imprisoned on Robben Island. Many of our leadership were either killed or went into exile, and it looked like the whole movement had been destroyed. It was 1970, and in South Africa, one of our customs, our African customs, is we name a child according to the circumstance of their birth or according to a destiny that the parents wish for this child. So my parents named me Anastasia, which means resurrection, or we shall rise again. And my father said, in this generation, we shall rise again. The movement shall rise again. No pressure, hey? So I grew up pretty much knowing that that was my destiny, that my destiny was to be part of a generation which would reignite the struggle and be a part of that movement against apartheid. So for those of you that don't know South African history very well, that led to 1976, which is when there was a rise in the Black consciousness movement. There was a student uprising. Again, there was a brutal backlash by the government. And by the time I was in high school, in the early 80s, the student movement started to get strong again. But at this point, all our leadership was mostly silenced or gone. And so it's just, I'm just painting a picture for you. You have young people who have decided that we're going to bring this government down with our bare hands if necessary. And we are going to change the situation. 86, it's 10 years since 1976. We were out in the streets, we were demonstrating. Very much some of the images that we're seeing currently right now on our TV screens when we look at what's happening in Israel and Palestine. Young people just throwing themselves and stones and anything they have at what they believe is an oppressive system. And it's into this situation that David Cooper Ryder meets me. And he says to me, you know, Anastasia, I think you have a real talent for this stuff. I think you should come and do a PhD with us. I looked at him and I was like, this man is smoking something. I mean, at this point, our slogan is liberation before education. I'm not even in class. I have in my mind, I know that I'm probably not going to make it out of my 20s. I've been recruited into the armed struggle. So I'm an active participant in all of what is going on. And this man comes and tells me that I really have a talent for these things and I should consider a PhD program. Luckily, David kept coming back, and he kept smoking whatever he was smoking. Because every time he saw me, he'd be like, really, Anastasia, I think you should think about this. I think you're a natural at this OD stuff. I really see something. And that for me was one of the first experiences of what the appreciative approach can bring to people. It's the ability to see possibility in another person when they can't even see it for themselves. It's literally that ability to see a different game, to see a different future. And fast forward a little bit, 1990, all the political movements were unbanned. The negotiation for a new South Africa began, which led to the CODESA process, the national negotiation. And between 1990 and 1994, there was an outbreak of violence in our communities at a scale that we hadn't witnessed before. At this point in time, the ANC had, and all liberation movements, had officially stopped the armed struggle. But every political party who was sitting at the national negotiation table was still pursuing an armed strategy on the ground. And because I had been in the movement, because I had been underground, because I understood the structures and I understood the strategies that were used in guerrilla warfare, and I understood the mindset of people who were involved in these conflicts, myself and a team of people were put together and we worked those conflict zones, some of the worst zones, for those 4 years, trying to hold the peace process together just long enough for us to reach a political solution. And those years were incredible years. I mean, I saw and witnessed and experienced things that we need a lot of drinks to get through. So I'm not going to talk about them tonight. But one of the things that taught me is that when it comes to human systems, no matter how we may perceive the other side, they always have a story that makes sense to them. every human being, I want to make it more general, every human being, whatever they are doing, whatever they are saying, whatever choices they are making, they genuinely believe it's the very best choice that they can make in that moment. I know very few people, and the ones that I do are on medication, like me. I know very few people who wake up in the morning and say, today I want to mess up my life. Today I want to make it such a train smash that everyone around me is going to hate me. Today I'm going to go out there and I'm just going to be an asshole. Are you with me? Very few people wake up in the morning saying that deliberately. Now they may end up going out there and really pissing everybody off, or being an absolute asshole, or making really bad decisions based on our perspective of where we stand. But they themselves are doing the very best in the moment that they know how to do. And part of our work as OD practitioners is this way of being, this beginning to become really compassionate with ourselves and others, and recognizing that everything we are seeing other people do, the outcome in their behavior, that there's a storyline behind it that really makes sense to them, that makes this choice that they're choosing seem to be the very best thing that they can do. And for me that's important, because it's only when we can truly honor another person's choice, not agree with, honor another person's choice, that we can enter their world and begin to expand those possibilities. And so it is when we work with the systems we work with, at whatever level. If we walk in with a judgmentalism or an attitude that believes we have something, an answer, something better, we give off that feeling in any way. Human beings have an amazing antenna, and they pick us up immediately. And then our ability to really be transformative in that system is lost. People shut down. You know the stories. So for me, that was one of the great lessons that I learned in this time. Fast forward again, it's 1994. We have our first democratic election, and I had the privilege of working at the Independent Electoral Commission. We had 4 months to pull off the election from nothing. We had to staff, we had to train, we had to put in systems. It was incredible. It was absolutely amazing. And for me, it's been a life lesson about what you can accomplish when everybody wants the same thing, and how it can all suddenly come together. But maybe that's a very South African thing. I don't know. I want to tell you a story about the Soccer World Cup. Not football, you know, football, soccer with the feet. So we hosted the Soccer World Cup in 2010 in South Africa. And as you know, the head of FIFA was a German guy. Now the Germans are very precise. We love them for that. And a week before the opening match, the FIFA people come to check the pitch where the opening match is going to be played at one of our stadiums. And the pitch is not yet laid. And the German goes nuts. He's like, do you realize that this game is in 1 week and there is no pitch? And the South Africans are like, but we've got 7 days. And 7 days later, there was a pitch and it worked. So I think that also speaks to the ability of people to just pull together under pressure and make something happen. So post the 1994 election, I began working in the space of community policing and reconciliation work. And this is what the Portland keynote will be about. In Portland, I will be there with 2 colleagues, one who spent 12 years on Robben Island and really speaks to the experience of the anti-apartheid activist experience, and another who was a special branch policeman in the apartheid regime, who actually was foundational in arresting my other colleague. And this colleague of mine, who was the policeman at the time, I got to work with him for 5 years on policing reform. Because part of what happened in South Africa is we had to, with the democracy, scrap every form of legislation, every piece of legislation, and rebuild an entire structure and system from the ground up. By 1997, I was absolutely fried. And I finally decided to take on Cooper Ryder's invitation to come and do my PhD here in Cleveland. And that time for me was a real opportunity to reflect. And I'm trusting that for each one of us as practitioners, we will find times and spaces to reflect. One of the things that happens to us as practitioners is we're so busy in the field working with clients that we never have that opportunity to step back and think through and reflect on that experience and generate new forms of knowledge. So for me, that's what the PhD was an opportunity to do. And through that PhD, I, thank goodness, it wasn't paid for. There was no scholarship, so I had to work my way through the program, which meant that I had an opportunity to work in many different countries with David and others. And I worked in a couple of conflict zones during that time. And so this is where I started to apply the appreciative approach to ethnic, religious, and political conflict. And that's what my dissertation was about, and the foundation of the work I do now, is how do we apply the appreciative approach to situations or circumstances that seem completely outside of that realm of possibility. How do we engage with conflicting parties in ways that honor and witness and understand the story behind who they are and help them find a way to live together? And that work, as I said, the PhD really created a foundation for me. And it's from that work that I've continued over the last few years, not a lot, because I'm not that old, over the last 15 years to work in other countries and other places. For me, what this has taught me, going back to the way of being, is that appreciative inquiry is not just about the 4D process. Do you know the 4D cycle? How many people know it? The discovery, dream, design, and delivery. So it's not just about the technology of being able to go into a system and do the 4D process. That is one aspect of appreciative inquiry. For me, what's been most helpful was imbibing and understanding the principles that underlie appreciative inquiry. So I'm just going to quickly write up the 5 principles and talk them through a little. So the principles, the first principle is the principle of social construction. The second is the positive principle. Who's going to give me a third one? Poetic. The fourth? Simultaneity. And this isn't incorrect spelling, it's South African spelling, okay? A fifth? Anticipatory. And the sixth, wholeness. I learned early on in my exposure to appreciative inquiry that if you can grasp the principles, they create a worldview or a way of seeing and being in relationship to the work you are doing that allows you to use any tool that you already have in your toolbox. So it helps you do the work you already do from what I'm begun to call an appreciative approach. So I'll give you an example of what this means. The principle of social construction, which seems pretty mainstream right now in a postmodern world, was quite a revelation to me when I first came to CASE and took this course. Because the professor said to me, your history is not static. And I was like, huh? Run that by me one more time. And he said, your history is not static. The events of your life are there, but how you make meaning of them changes over time. So every time you tell your story, you tell it in a fresh new way. And you tell it from a perspective of where you are standing today. So that story is not static. And I found this a very liberating concept for someone like me who when I got here, like I said, was really fried. I'd had a very intense first 20 years of my life. And I was very wounded from much of what I had experienced. And to grasp the concept that I could tell the story of my life in different ways, that I wasn't a victim of my circumstance, but I was an author of my own destiny. That everything that had happened to me, whether it was painful, good, bad, all those things were merely labels that I myself was placing on them. And that I am every day given the opportunity to take the fullness of what I experience, those very real things that happen, and narrate them in a particular way. And that's for me where the positive principle helps a lot. If I choose, if I have the capacity to narrate a different story, why would I not tell a story that gives me hope and a future? Why would I not tell a story that allows me to live into a hopeful, beautiful place? And I saw this at work in the conflict situations where I was. That what happens in these endemic, deep-rooted, intergenerational conflicts that are where the parties are organized around either ethnic, religious, or political identity that are really intergenerational. For example, Israel-Palestine. For example, South Africa. For example, Nigeria. For example, the Middle East right now. For example, Eastern Europe. These long-term endemic conflicts. The way the story is told, generation to generation, creates a particular trajectory for those communities. So an example is when I worked in Eastern Europe, one of the people from Slovakia, we were talking about the conflict, said to me, this conflict, when I asked, what's this conflict about? This conflict started 300 years ago. Then you know you're, dude, like, you know, now you're on hectic ground when you're told 300 years ago. You go to Israel, Palestine, and you talk to them about the issues that are there, and both sides will refer you to 2,000 plus years ago. So this is the types of conflicts, and in that we begin to align our identity with a particular version of events. Particular meaning is made of those events that create a trajectory that continue the conflict. And what I realized for myself was as liberating South Africa, as amazing as that was, and as much as that was the outcome that we were fighting for, once it happened, I experienced a deep existential crisis because my whole meaning, my whole purpose for existing was suddenly gone. And so when we come to peace building work, we often see that this conflict can be resolved, and yet the parties continue in it. And part of the reason is that our very identity as a person comes into a relationship with the conflict that is difficult to break. I know who I am because I am part of this group, and this group knows who it is because you are the enemy. And so you see the power of these stories. We call them conflict narratives, and how they move from generation to generation, which makes it almost impossible to begin to find a future together. In order to have that, you have to go and rewrite the entire narrative. Not the incidents, those stand, but the meaning that is made of them. And create a trajectory to that narrative that allows the parties to live in relationship with one another in the future. But in the process, you have to handle the existential crisis of meaning that individuals encounter then. An example is when the armed struggle finally ended, I was what they called the part of the lost generation. I had no education. All my life skills were around pursuing an armed war. So any skills that I had were not useful in a democracy. I remember when I first came to Cleveland, I used to force myself, I had to force myself to take the same route home every day, because I'd been so trained that you always take a different route, because if someone wants to kill you, what's the first thing they do? You saw the movies, eh? They track your, they look for, what is it called? Your patterns. And I would literally take the same route home every day, like watching over my shoulder, like, oh God, they're going to kill me. And then tell myself, like, Anastasia, are you dumb? You live in America right now, and the whole thing is over. But it becomes so deeply ingrained in you that these transitions that we are effecting out there, we also have to effect within us. Are you with me? Everything that we want to see happen in a human system, we too ourselves have to go through that journey if we are going to be meaningful in relationship to that system. And this is true even at the level of an individual in a coaching relationship. It is very difficult to coach another human being through a space and a transition that you yourself have no clue about, that you yourself have no connecting point with. It's not impossible, it's just more difficult. Once you have walked the path yourself, it is easier to walk with others through that. And this is the beauty of life. This is the beauty of your life. Everything that has happened to you in your life has brought you to this point and makes you the perfect vehicle, the perfect instrument for the client that you will be working with. And every opportunity you have to grow in your capacity, and by that I mean to fail miserably and spectacularly, is another opportunity to enhance your capacity and ability to work in future systems. So I'm the kind of person that when I fail, I do it spectacularly. You know, I don't go for half measures, because when I get up there, I want the capacity to have grown in me. And so our work is also about recognizing that we don't have all the answers. In fact, we probably have none of the answers. we don't know what's best for this person or this system or this community. What we do know is that we can journey with them in a way that creates space for them to tell the story that they want to tell, to explore the possibilities that they believe are out there, to challenge them by offering new possibilities, and to have the privilege for that moment to be a part of their journey, knowing that once you leave, the very best thing they could ever say is, why did we hire that consultant? She really didn't do anything. Because that means that they really did it themselves and they believe in the outcome and the product. But I think sometimes there's so much pressure on us as practitioners to perform, to look like we know what we're doing, to look like we have the answers, to look like we're smart, to look like we are the ones that made that difference. Nothing would have happened if we hadn't come. There's a lot of pressure outside and inside for that. But I believe that if we can be in a human system in a way that is compassionate towards what they are experiencing, that opens up the conversation rather than shutting it down, that encourages and invites people to explore the possibilities of their own story and how those stories connect or don't connect to one another, and to have the conversations that they need to have in that moment and make the decisions that they need to make in order to move forward. Then I feel like we're possibly working at that level of being appreciative, being helpful, being meaningful. I want to take a break there and sip from my glass of wine and give you an opportunity just for a few moments to chat to those around you. What struck you? Do you have questions? What's coming up for you? And then I'm going to open it up and let's spend the rest of the time that we have together in an open conversation. Yes? So take a few moments with the people closest to you, just process a little. I was just getting into an amazing conversation now about Venezuela and some of her experiences and mine, but we can share that with the group. Where are you? What's going on for you? What came up in the conversation?
I am here tonight with my sister.
Beautiful.
She was a drug and alcohol counselor for many years, and I am an MPod graduate, so I'm all into the Appreciative Inquiry and all that kind of stuff. And when I saw you talking tonight, I said, you've got to come, because I always talk to her about Appreciative Inquiry and what an impression is made on my coaching and the things that I do. And we were just talking because not only are we sisters, we also share an apartment. And we were talking about how we don't argue, we're able to be honest with each other. It's like, if you're doing something and it bothers me, I can just tell you, whereas other people you can't be that open with. And we realized that we both come from a place of, whether we used your words or not, but of wanting to understand somebody else's story.
Yes.
And that there are people that you want to, even though we live together, I always learn something new about her every day or every week or whatever. So it's just been a wonderful experience to bring her into sort of the AI family and really kind of understand what I've been talking about for years since I graduated from MPod.
And I think really for me, the Appreciative Inquiry approach, we are all doing it, even if we don't know what it's called. I think what the AI does is it has systematized some of the thinking and created language for a lot of stuff that many of us who are in the field and drawn to the field and working in the helping professions just come from that place inside anyway. So when we first encounter AI, it's often with a sense of real resonance, like, somebody gets me. Yes, beautiful, thank you. Yes.
We're working on Mui Watt to drop out of the MBA program and join the MPOD program.
Or here's an idea, do both. Why not? You're young enough. What else is coming up for people? Yes.
So, Anastasia, I'm going to represent my partner in crime here. She just was wondering if it was the wine talking, and I think what she's bringing up is brilliant. I think that, you know, for us, we're newbies all back here in the MPOD program, listening to you speak takes it to a very, very different level of how this can be utilized in much more of a world setting. So I think, at least for me, I think about it in the context of my organization and this and that, not even close to the kinds of implications that you've just laid out. And so what I thought was brilliant was she was talking about, just think if, you know, we had the opportunity to do something like this or use this with ISIS.
Wow.
And with other governments whereby we don't see eye to eye with, and again, similar to some of the struggles that you went through in your country and what kind of world it would then be if people understood each other at that level in this manner. And I thought it was really insightful.
It is very insightful, and it's one of the things that drives me nuts is what I call the terror narrative. And it's been going since 9/11 on a global scale from all sides. It's a painting of the other side as evil, the enemy, doesn't understand anything, inhumane. Everybody's doing it. And when you stay in that narrative, there's no space, there's no opportunity to explore a different story. And I know, this is one of the things we were talking about now, I know from personal experience that if you begin to have that different conversation with the other, with the enemy, you often become a target of your own side. It's a very fine line in those kinds of conflicts that you play, especially if you're a participant or protagonist in the conflict. Because any kind of challenging of that narrative, as I said, really creates this existential crisis, because it's about good and bad, good and evil, the moral and the immoral. We have the high ground, which allows us to do all kinds of atrocious things because we have the moral high ground. I'm speaking here again from experience. So one of the real things I had to deal with after the apartheid struggle was over, 94 was there, is dealing with all the things I did in the name of this moral struggle. And realizing that you just swap yourself on the sides, and what you say the enemy does is immoral, you're actually doing, but you can call it moral. But it would be a very different world if we could just cut each other a little bit of slack and recognize that everybody's fundamentally doing the best they can. I really believe that there are very, very few truly evil people in the world. I could count on one hand how many I've met. Everybody else is really just trying to do the best they can.
When I was in the DM program a few years ago, one of the paths that I went down briefly, because it fascinated me, was, and a lot of it was in South Africa, were the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions. And I thought when I first thought about that, when I first read about that, it was a great mystery to me. How could you sit in front of someone who had murdered your loved one? And this is the part that at the time I missed. And hear them tell their story. And find in that story your ability to forgive them. And I think the only way that that ever happened was because you recognized that, just as you said, that when it started, they had their own story that was supported in many cases, in South Africa in particular, by the mores of a great many people and the government structure. And so every time there would be a place at which they might have a reflective point, the reinforcement was, no, just go ahead and do it because it's what we do, it's right. And in the end, I was dramatically moved by human beings' capacity. And I read a lot of that testimony and in how the description of killings that took place the descriptions were in extraordinary detail. And how loved ones would sit across the table from someone who was telling about that and would have the capacity to, as they described it, a sense of relief, a sense of clarity and understanding, and not be filled with hate when something so awful had been done. And I think that's what you just said, and I honestly didn't connect it well until tonight. It's the power of understanding that life is only about stories. And regardless of how close we are in any other way, all of us have our own individual stories, and we do socially construct our reality from that. And then it's important what do we do with it.
No, and I think what's important, I want to raise about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa is people could seek amnesty, and they were granted amnesty on 2 conditions. Number one, that whatever they did was politically motivated, so it wasn't a personal vendetta. They were either given an order or they were part of a system. And number 2, that they told the whole truth, that they did not hold back anything. Never was a condition of amnesty regret or feeling sorry for what they had done. Never, it wasn't one of the conditions. You could go on that stand and you could say, I would do it all again, but here is what I did. And I think the importance of that was, for me, was opening up the opportunity for people to share honestly and openly and let the truth come out about what had happened, and not have people pretend to feel regret or pretend that they had suddenly had this change of heart about what had happened. And that for me was the beauty of the TRC process. And I had an opportunity to, in the 80s, when a lot of the atrocities were perpetrated against anti-apartheid activists, the head of the police, so the Minister of Police, was a guy called Adrian Vlok. And he was a very, very vicious man, and he did many atrocious things and ordered many killings. And I had an opportunity about 3 or 4 years ago to have him come and speak to a group of students, because I teach a course where I bring American students over to South Africa to share his story. And in that story, he shared that in 1995, when the TRC was going, he went and he sought amnesty. But he wasn't sorry for what he did. He just went and he told the truth about and he received amnesty. And about 4 years later, his wife got very, very ill. And she was diagnosed with cancer. And she ended up dying of cancer. But he had to nurse her through this disease. And in that process, he had an encounter with God. This is how he narrates the story. And he realized in that what he had done under the apartheid system was very, very wrong. And so now we're talking 10 years after the amnesty was given. He went back to a certain, he felt convicted in his relationship with God that he must go and ask forgiveness. Particularly, there was a very, very high-profile case of 7 men that were killed, the Craddock 7, that he had ordered the hit on them. He had ordered his police to go and kill them. And it was a very painful experience in our history, that he must go to the surviving families of the Craddock 7 and ask for forgiveness. But not only must he ask for forgiveness, he must wash their feet as Jesus did, as a symbol of his deep regret and his desire to be forgiven. So the way he tells the story is he went the first time, and the widows of the Cradock Seven refused to see him, because now it's 10 years later. So he went back and he says, God told me, go back and try again. So he says, okay. So he went back a second time, and this time 5 of the 7 refused to see him. And he said, well, I tried. And he went back, and then the way he tells the story, he says, God said, no, I told you to go back again until all 7 of them will do it. And this man went back 4 times, and on the 4th time, he actually did this ceremony with the widows of the Cradock Seven. And I think what his story speaks to is the journey that it takes for each person to come to a new reality, to come to a different place of being, to be able to narrate a different story. When he was telling the story, we're talking about an 80-plus old man who, looking back on his life and career, has to acknowledge and admit that everything he believed was wrong, that every action he took, every decision he made, every success in his career, which took him to the pinnacle of being the head of police, was wrong. And that takes great courage. I have a lot of admiration for that man, more so than if he had, in the first application for amnesty, just said, yeah, you know, I'm sorry, hey, thanks, okay, shut up, bye. You know, it's a journey. It's a journey. I saw another hand. No? Okay.
This brings up a question for me. So my understanding is that part of the spirit of appreciative inquiry is about honoring everyone's story, right? You don't pick and choose whose story you're honoring. How is the approach different when you are working with people who are able to honor the other side's story, let's say, and their own, versus the other side or other people who refuse to honor anyone else's story? So, I mean, do you equally work with them? I mean, how does that play out? Maybe if you have any experiences that talk about that.
Yeah, I do. So for me, it's about we're unable to honor another person's story when that story is deeply threatening to our own. Fundamentally, that's the dynamic that's happening there. It's that in listening and giving airtime to your story, it creates a lot of anxiety and defensiveness in my story, because it's going to undermine something very important for me. So for me, in situations like that, it is easiest when you can get both parties to focus on a future. That's where the dreaming or the imagination or the desire for where are we headed comes in. So that becomes the criteria for the story we're telling. Because then the question becomes, how does that storyline help you achieve what you say you want to achieve? How does staying with that way of thinking work to create the future you're looking for? And how does it work against it? So then your story isn't right or wrong. And your story is not better than my story. It's more about how do the stories allow us to have the future that we envisage or desire. So that's for me what breaks that blockade. And again, it's about compassion. You know, how is that behavioral pattern serving you right now? How is it serving a purpose for you? Even if it is a destructive or dysfunctional pattern, you are continuing to engage in it because it is fundamentally serving something. What is the something that it is serving? And how does being attached to that something work for you? How do you make that work for you? Are you with me?
So, but it sounds like the assumption here is that they'll come to the table to be able to even have this conversation. Right? I mean, we're talking about, for example, ISIS or some groups that are pretty...
No, I mean, in
right.
conflict zones, in conflict situations, most of the work of the mediator is to get the parties to the table. Once at the table, it's really easy. But it's all the work that goes into getting them to a point where they actually want to. And part of what makes these endemic identity-based conflicts so destructive is often there's no desire to have a future with the other side. The desire is annihilation. The desire is complete obliteration of the other side. Well, what's the future you see? Well, I see that this group of people is completely wiped out, and I never have to deal with them again. So there's a process there.
So you mentioned reparations, and one of the biggest things that I've heard in all the American police conflict with communities is a lot of times the community will flat out say to the police, until you do two things, acknowledge past grievances, whether you don't have to apologize, but just acknowledge that bad things happen, and then come up with a reparations program. I've heard it said and ignored by a lot of police departments when I've listened to the discussions and followed them. So how important have you found reparations to be in the healing process to move forward? Are they a pivotal thing that you would say, yeah, you probably should do reparations because they really help move things forward?
I mean, I think it's a no-brainer that reparations help move things forward. But we often find people have different paradigms of what constitutes justice. And when you're dealing with police, generally you're dealing with a paradigm that says justice equals punishment. So if you do something wrong, we punish you for it, and that is justice. Communities who are asking for reparation are looking at justice from a different paradigm. They're saying justice entails the rebuilding of the relationships, the reconstruction of what has been broken. So it's less about the perpetrator being punished and more about the perpetrator coming to the party to help make the system whole again. So I think for me, in my experience with police community reconciliation work, it's that difference of paradigms that gets in the way initially. And so part of the work then to get police to that kind of table is around challenging or expanding their assumptions about what constitutes justice. Because for police personnel generally, and I think there's a particular culture of police that's pretty much global, you know, they're in the law and order, there's right, there's wrong. If I'm wrong, you're right. If you're wrong, I'm right. So there's a whole movement that has to happen there. And for healing to happen, I think that it is my personal experience, so I don't know that it's true, but it has been true in my experience, that if there is no opportunity for police and community to find one another on those levels, and for the community to feel that truly there's an acknowledgement that something has been broken that needs to be fixed, it's very difficult to move forward.
I wanted to ask you about approach and the backstory is, so I was a Marine and I spent about 9 months in Fallujah. And one thing that I noticed was the approach and what folks did when they went in with preconceived notions had a lot to do with what we experienced afterwards. So if the approach was, I'm looking at you as a decent human being, I don't know if you've done something right or wrong, let's find out, okay, you did something not that bad, go about your business. If the other approach was, you're a bad person, I'm in this country to do bad things to you, we created our own enemies at a cyclic rate. And it was reinforced to me, you know, back here, my approaches with people, if you approach them with an open mind and open heart, just the feedback that you would get from them was just so much better. And I didn't know in your work in these conflict zones around how much the approach to a person played a role in what you got as a reaction to them and constructive work afterwards.
I would very much say that I have a similar experience to you. That to the extent that people see you in your approach to them, and remember, it's again all about authenticity, because people have this authenticity antenna that just goes off. But to the extent that you can approach people with what I would call unconditional positive regard, the sense that unconditional positive regard, I believe that whatever you have is for good. I believe that wherever you're coming from is from a space that you believe is a good space. I approach you to say that any choices you have made are the right choices given the information you had and the perspective you were holding. That to the extent we can do that with other people, we get a much more, and we can be invitational, we get a much more generative conversation going. It also means that there's opportunities for you to be extremely disappointed, for that not to be the space that the person is operating from, for them to use that in manipulative ways and try and harm you. And for me, that's always the price I'm willing to pay to live in the kind of world that I choose to create. And so I think also as practitioners, it's about the discernment to see the reality while still holding open the possibility that something new can emerge. So not just being naive in it, but holding that open, especially in a situation like you're talking about, which is a war zone situation. There are preconceived parameters, so not being dumb about it, being a little careful, but staying open to the possibility and working with what's evoked there. Yeah.
So I love that, the unconditional positive approach. How do you bridge that with someone who doesn't see you in that way because you've had conflict with them for a while? So how do you come to them and let them know that you're willing to open your heart in that way, and then get them to see you that way? Because
You call her.
If you have conflict history with someone, and then you decide, you know what, maybe I'm doing something wrong, so I want to try this approach, and you go to them, their first reaction is going to be, I don't believe you because of our history. So how do you really project that? I have an open heart and I want to try new and get them to buy into it. Do you have a suggestion for that?
I think that's the story of Adrian Flock. That part of it is about being consistent and being willing to be rejected, and showing that over and over and over again you're willing to make that vulnerability happen. And there's beautiful reasons to bring in third parties to help with the opening up of those conversations. But there's an English saying that I really love, which is the proof of the pudding is always in the tasting. And in the end, no matter what people think in a moment, in the end, the proof of the pudding will always be in the tasting. We just have to consistently be that, as authentically as we can in a moment. And that itself witnesses for us to the other person.
Okay, so I'm an engineer, and I'm here because I'm supporting my wife with her program. But it is going to be a difficult question, but I'm very curious to see, especially since you come from a country that has gone through something extremely similar to what ours is going. When you have an environment that obviously is suppressed and controlled, and we're talking about media and everything, what, based on your experiences, you think is going to be the most efficient method for getting into the AI? I will not say probably understanding, because we're talking in a scenario where 80 to 90% of the population is against the regime. However, we don't have the guns, we don't have anything with power, but we have the majority of people. What do you think as doing what you're doing in your career could be something that could help getting other people into the mindset of what exactly we need to do in order to uprise, or not uprise, but
make a change.
make a change, yeah.
I think the one thing I learned from South Africa is, as the anti-apartheid movement, we were very good at what we were against, but we weren't very clear on what we did want. So when the transition happened, and I think for those of you that are kind of following the South African scenario, you'll see now we're 20-something years into our democracy, and we're really struggling. We're struggling to make this miracle a lived reality on a day-to-day basis. So for me, part of that 80% of the population conversation can go with the principle of anticipatory or simultaneity, which states that I live today as if the future I desire already exists. So what is the future that I am desiring? How do I live that future today? Take the consequences in a regime like this of what that would mean. And how do we get more and more of us to live that alternative? Because the thing about South Africa that shifted the balance there is the South African apartheid government was the third best army in the world. They come after the third best army, but we had the numbers. And at some point, it doesn't matter how good your army is if you don't have the numbers. At some point, and we're learning this in a lot of these wars that are being fought right now, it doesn't matter how good the army is, because there are non-conventional wars that are being fought. So numbers count. So for me, in answer to the engineer question, you know, what's the practicalities of this? I'll give an example. My parents were anti-apartheid activists, so they founded an organization where we lived as though apartheid did not exist. What that meant is that my brothers and sisters were of different colors, which was against the legislation. We lived in a white-only area, but with people of color, as they would say in the States, which meant that we were under perpetual not just threat, but perpetually being watched by the security branch. If we walked out of our home, we were being beaten by those that were around us. But every day we just decided we are going to live as though apartheid does not exist. And we're going to live that alternative because it's an alternative we believe in. And I think this is the beginnings of what can be done in situations as extreme as Venezuela. And then, as I was saying to your beautiful wife, you know, each one of us only has the sphere of influence that we have. Each one of us can only touch those few individuals that we have access to. Our families, our friends, our colleagues at work, colleagues in the MPART program, when we walk into a store, the person that serves us, when we go to a restaurant, the person who is the waitress there, when we walk down the street, the person that we see at the traffic light. All of us only have that as a sphere of influence. And that is what we should focus on, is how do I create an experience for somebody else that makes their life a better experience having met me, whether it's a brief encounter or whether it's a longer term encounter. But in the end, that's all we can be responsible for. How do we sow a new story, a new conversation, a hopeful possibility for ourselves and for others, for the next generation and for the past generation?
What would you do in a case where it is really hard for people to picture a better future when they haven't had it? For example, that's been already 11 years or more actually. 16 years. Mm-hmm. So kids that were born whenever he got in power, they never got a chance to live something different. Mm-hmm. So what type of things do you guys in your careers use it as examples when they have never seen anything like that and they don't have the possibility of looking, let's say, at a Discovery Channel because that's control, or because they don't have the money to fly out or even get to the next neighboring country?
I mean, I think that's a very profound question, and it's one that I really encountered. You know, I traveled for the first time overseas when I was 19, and it was in Europe, and I suddenly realized, you know, I've been fighting for a democracy, but I've never seen what it looks like. It just blew my mind. I mean, I walked around with my mouth on the floor. And I'm not extolling Europe as the best of democracies, but like you're saying, I'd grown up with an ideal that I had never seen in reality. And there's a big difference between imagining something and experiencing something. But I think in your case, if you're talking 16 years, there are people who have had an alternate experience. And I think the important thing is to begin gathering that wisdom, that experience, in a way that can make a difference for the younger generation, for those who have been born without the possibility of that experience. And I want to say, where there's life, there's hope. You know? Where there's life, there's hope. We don't know what will happen, but we know what we want to be part of. Whether it succeeds or it doesn't is not the question. The question is that history judges us by is what did we choose to do, not were we successful. So keep going. Okay. I think my time may be up, am I right? Huh? How do you want to wrap up? How do I want to wrap up? I'll just wrap you like this, and then I put you in my bag, and then I go out the door. I'm not sure how I want to wrap up. So am I going to be thrown out? No. And they didn't eat me, so that's good. They never eat me. And I've still got some wine there,
So I expected great stories, but the depth and the richness of the stories, as I said, I self-deprecatingly humor myself so I don't break down into tears, like that. But I really just want to acknowledge your truth and your depth of life experience that you've given us. Thank you.